Hi, folks. This is Dr. Emily Shining with American Resiliency. I'm here with a special guest this week. This is Ash, architect in Boise, and she's also the primary architect of our Discord server. But what she's here to talk about today is something that I know is really serious for many people in terms of an emerging concern that is wildfire risk. When I hear from folks who are dealing with the reality of emerging wildfire risk in their area, for a lot of this is very emotional, very frightening, and we don't know how to respond. That's why I'm so grateful that Ash is here today. She's here to teach us how to respond. Ash, is there anything we can do to protect ourselves from increasing wildfire risk?
There's loads of things we can do, and I'm excited to tell you about some of them. So, welcome to Home Retrofitting for Climate Resilience, and this is about preparing for fire events. No matter where you live, one of the best things you can do to prepare for an emergency is having a go bag, also called a bug out bag. This will help for any type of evacuation, from fires to floods to hurricanes. This is not a bag for surviving in the woods for long periods. It's a bag with just enough in it to make you comfortable staying in a hotel or shelter for a few weeks. It should also contain important papers like passports, medical records, including your pet's medical records, insurance information, as well as irreplaceable items like family photos and mementos you might want to keep protected. Refer to the chart at the right for a good idea of what you should take with you during an evacuation. This is from Katie L. Wood. She's got several nice graphics up on her website for ways to prepare for emergencies. Also, please keep your car tank filled. There's nothing worse than having to wait in long lines at gas stations when you need to be leaving town. You also need to have a family emergency plan. If your spouse works downtown and the kids are at school, where are you meeting up? Who's picking up the kids and who's in charge of pets? If anyone relies on public transportation, how are they getting home if the buses aren't running? If you have animals, make a plan for them as well. Some hotels won't take pets, and large animals like horses are going to be much harder to take with you. Have a good plan to evacuate with them too. Practice this. Practice leaving your house quickly. You want everyone in your household to be on the same page. I wanted to talk a little about this because there's the common misconception in a lot of fire country that if you're not in the WUI, you're not at risk. WUI, for those of you not familiar with it, means wildland-urban interface. These are the areas where houses meet undeveloped land and vegetation. These areas are usually required to meet a more strict fire-resistant code for building. But if your home is older,
Ash,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no
I want to
problem.
make a brief point that I think you could reinforce. I have heard that a lot of new development is in this wildland urban interface now.
It is.
That
Yeah,
if you're looking at new builds, you're at a higher risk for being
definitely.
in the WUI. Okay, cool.
Yeah, especially areas like Boise, Denver, as they expand, the newer subdivisions are going to be, right next to the wildlands. So you're going to have a higher risk for that. Um,
So, like, if you're a person who is thinking about relocating
mhm.
into Denver, into Colorado, I think that we are attracted by these beautiful landscapes. We like the idea of being in the woods with all the birds and stuff, but being aware of this fire risk is really important. And I'll touch
Absolutely.
out now. It's just as people are thinking about moving,
Hmm.
highlighting this as a risk you can avoid seems worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. The closer you are to a downtown, the the longer a firefighter group will have to make sure that they're stopping the fire before it gets to you. If you're out on the fringes, you're going to have a lot more of that vegetative matter and a higher incidence of a fire maybe sparking where you are. So it's a lot safer to be closer to a downtown. Although I live in a fire risk area too, so I can't blame anybody for moving out to one because they are beautiful. If your home is older, even if it's in the WUI, it may have been constructed before a fire building code was in place. I also like to look at tools like Risk Factor to get a better idea of fire risk. Fire Factor is a risk modeling tool used by financial institutions, corporations, and governments to inform their decision making. It analyzes things like fire and flood risks at a very detailed level. So this is the map of the WUI and Boise, Idaho. And here's that same map with the risk factor map overlaid. You can see how many people in east, north, and south sides of town probably have underestimated their risk for fire because they're not in the WUI. You can find risk factor maps on most real estate websites like Zillow and Realtor.com, or look up your address on firststreet.org. Fire brands are often called embers. I'll be using those two words interchangeably. If you've ever sat around a campfire, you know how those hot little sparks can float above the heat of a fire and land on things a good distance away. During large fires, which often create their own powerful winds, they can travel as far as 5 miles. When the embers are particularly thick, they're sometimes referred to as brand blizzards. Fire brands are responsible for 90% of the homes ignited during wildfires. They can get into homes through openings like vents or land outside on small piles of leaves and ignite. So we want to make sure that when they land on surfaces or near our homes, there's no way to get in and nothing to ignite. Think of it like trying to make a campfire with only a pile of thick logs versus trying to make a campfire with a handful of tinder. It's much easier to get the fire going when you've got tinder to ignite. There's a video from the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, that shows a brand blizzard demonstration that's an amazing way to understand how quickly embers can ignite a house. And Emily, are you okay with linking that in the description below? I think it's really helpful.
Totally. I think that
Awesome.
being able to visualize how these fires tend to start, how home fires tend to start, gives us an important way to face our fear. Because if we're talking about a tinder ignition situation and we're able to really understand this risk that precedes a large wildfire, I think it makes it so much clearer why the measures you're going to discuss next are really effective.
Yeah, and lots of testing has been done on this. It's really cool the way that they've set up. It's basically a little home inside a huge warehouse, and they just shoot fire embers at it. It's a really effective way to see what a fire could look like and how they could spark.
This sounds like a fun test to do, too, in a controlled environment.
They probably were having fun.
So that link will be in the video description for anyone who wants to watch the brand blizzard demonstration.
Thank you. Defensible space is the simplest way to break down the process of making your home fire resistant. You're thinking in zones and making each progressively hard to burn as it gets closer to your house. The first zone within 5 feet of your house is called the immediate zone. Everything within this zone should be non-combustible. This means a lot of continual maintenance. Keep your gutters cleaned out, keep the roof swept off, keep anything combustible swept away from the foundation of your house. Make sure porch furniture and entry mats are non-flammable. This is also the zone where we'll consider the flammability of the shell of your house and make sure that all of your openings are protected. The second zone is from 5 feet to 30 feet out. It's called the intermediate zone. This area needs to have carefully planned plantings. We'd like to avoid conifers here because they're highly flammable. You want to make sure to remove dead plant material as soon as you see it. Don't let those dead branches hang out for a few seasons. Get them cleared out. Another thing to note is gas grills. It's a good idea to keep them away from your house and any ignitable material. First, because they can start a fire, but also because once a fire is going, they're dangerous to the firefighters nearby. Propane tanks have safety valves that are designed to keep pressure from building up in the tank when it gets overheated, but occasionally they don't work, and we don't want any firefighters to be injured from exploding tanks. The last zone, the extended zone, is anything between 30 to 100 feet from your house. Ideally, this is where we'd like to keep things like sheds and outbuildings. This is also the zone where, although we don't have to plan our landscaping quite as carefully, we still want to keep it cleaned up. We want to remove fuel ladders, which are ways that fire would climb up into the tree canopy. Canopy fires burn much more intensely than ground fires, so we want to keep that from happening near our buildings. This means making sure that trees are trimmed up at least 10 feet high, that you don't have any shrubs planted underneath trees where the fire can climb, and that trees are spaced so that their canopies are far apart. Community is probably the most important step for fire preparedness, and it's also a little bit of a cheat code. If a whole neighborhood works together to maintain defensible spaces, it's going to be much easier than trying to turn your home into a fireproof fortress. Conversely, if your neighbor's house is only 10 feet away and they haven't cleaned out their gutters, that becomes your risk too. So create a neighborhood plan with input from all of your neighbors. Schedule cleanups where folks who are able can help everyone else with tasks like sweeping roofs or cleaning gutters. Encourage people to share tools like ladders and rakes. Purchase fireproofing materials like rolls of wire mesh as a group and split the cost. Also, if you have neighbors living on their own, make sure to check in with them. Ask if they have plans for evacuation during an emergency. And people who are elderly or have disabilities are often more at risk during disasters, so make sure that none of your neighbors are left behind.
I think this is such a nice point building on the general need for community resilience and
Mm-hmm.
how important community resilience is. I could see if you were focused on like your fireproof fortress model, how you could have a lot of resentment towards a neighbor who didn't do a good job keeping their gutters cleaned. But if you got to know that person, maybe it turns out they're recovering from spine surgery. You
Absolutely.
know, a lot of times where our communities have a need to build resilience, it's because we don't know each other and we don't know how to help each other.
Yep.
So I love the community focus here.
Yep. And start with something simple like a cookout. Get to know your neighbors and kind of suggest this idea to them. Like, hey, did you know we're at risk for a fire? Can I help you rake your lawn or help clean your gutters? And try to, start off with something that you're not trying to get everybody to work right away. Invite them over for some hot dogs. And
Great opportunity to model grill placement too. Yeah.
right. Do you see how far my grill is from my house?
Just getting my steps in and building
Right.
fire resilience.
Exactly, exactly. But yeah, try to make a fun community effort around this and start off small. Don't dump everything on everybody at once, but it can be a really positive thing to work together with your neighbors. It can be a lot of fun. All right, so the fire resistant landscaping. Do a search for a fire resistant plant database for your area. Oftentimes, local universities or conservation districts will have information about what to include in your Firewise landscaping. Attributes that decrease plant flammability include low oil or resin content, high moisture content, soap, latex, or pectin content, compact growth form, green stems, and being drought tolerant. In general, this means that deciduous plants and succulents are more fire resistant than tall grasses and conifers. Again, proper spacing and timely removal of dead plant matter is a huge part of keeping your landscape firewise, so make sure to keep things pruned and cleaned up. It is possible to xeriscape with Firewise landscaping. This beautiful landscaping is in the Idaho Firewise Demonstration Garden and the Botanical Gardens in Boise. Keeping fire from burning the structures nearby is critical in reducing the heat and embers that will affect your house. All of your buildings, sheds, garages, barns, even chicken coops, need to be carefully considered to make sure that they're cleaned up and protected from fire in the same way that your home is. This means treating the area 5 feet around them as a non-combustible zone. Decks should, at a minimum, be made of fire-treated wood or a fire-resistant composite. Framing should be heavy timber, or if you're retrofitting an existing deck, use a foil-faced bitumen on the top and sides of the joists. Keep plants at least 5 feet from decks, and also make sure that below the deck is enclosed so that embers can't start a fire underneath. Routinely remove debris that accumulates between each deckboard gap and debris that accumulates at the intersection between the deck and the house. If you aren't thrilled about the idea of frequently scraping dirt and leaves from between each deckboard, consider replacing your deck with a patio. Also think about pergolas, awnings, and trellises that are up against your house. They should be made of fire-resistant materials and attached in such a way as to not trap heat or potential debris against your house. Vents are access points for embers to get inside your attic or your crawl space. Next time you're outside your house, walk around it and take a look at the vents. You might see them under the gable of your house, which is the pointy part like this, in the soffits, which are around the perimeter of your house, they look like a ceiling basically, or in the foundation of your house. Keeping your vents shielded from firebrands is simple. 1/8 inch or 16th inch wire mesh, make sure to use metal and not plastic, will keep the embers on the outside. You can also replace your vents with a fire-resistant product like Vulcan Vent. It has an intumescent matrix that will expand and close the vent completely when exposed to heat. Soffits should be enclosed. ideally with a non-flammable material like fiber cement. Open or exposed eaves are common in older homes, but it has been found that embers and convective heat can be trapped under the overhangs and easily ignite the exposed rafters. So if you can, please enclose them as shown in this detail down here.
This is very interesting because I have read in many sources how often homes burn from vents and eaves.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at these retrofits, this doesn't look like a $10,000 retrofit to me. This
No.
looks, you could improve your safety substantially. What kind of a budget do you think you would need to replace your vents with wire mesh?
You'd be using the same vents. You'd just be tacking wire mesh behind them, nailing it in behind them. And, a roll of wire mesh, I would need to look it up. But if you're splitting the cost with your neighbors, it could be really, really cheap. You could be
It,
looking at a $50 project to,
like tacking wire mesh over the vents is not
yeah,
like I wouldn't need your level of skill to do
no, you
that.
can, you
You
can do
could do
this in an
that with
hour or
a
two.
relatively janky level of skill. I think you
Yeah,
would
you
be
might need some
okay.
wire snips and nails and a roll of wire mesh. And again, split that with your neighbors because you're not going to need the whole thing. And cut it to size and nail it around your vents.
It's really cool. And closing off the eaves, that's a little bit more challenging, but it still looks
Mhm.
accessible. Like
Yeah,
anyone who ever felt brave enough to fix their own deck should be able to feel brave enough to do this. It's not a
right,
$10,000 repair, and it improves your chances so much that your home won't burn. It should be a
right.
really empowering, I think, for people to see this.
Yeah, in that Blizzard video that we're going to link, they actually have a camera shot from inside showing how all of those little embers get into the attic space and how they can ignite. And so, yeah, you're substantially reducing your fire risk just by doing this.
That's so cool. I think so many people feel a sense of helplessness with fire. This sort of very practical, not that hard resilience measure, I hope this will help us regain some sense of power and agency.
I hope so too. Yeah. Now we're on to what most people probably think of first when they think of fire resistance. Class A materials are materials that are non-ignitable. If an ember lands on them, they will not burn, but they won't necessarily keep heat from passing through the material and igniting something behind it. Think about metal roofing or siding. It doesn't burn, but it's also great at heat transfer, and it could still allow something under it, like foam insulation, to melt or catch on fire if the heat near it is great enough. So Class A materials are great for resisting ignition from embers, but they won't necessarily protect your structure from like a wall of flame or a great deal of heat. If you're in a fire-prone area, and I would argue that just about any area could be fire-prone from our changing climate conditions, a Class A roof is an absolute necessity. Luckily, many of our roofs are already Class A. Asphalt shingles, which is what most people have on their roofs, are Class A. Concrete or clay tiles, metal, and even some types of roofing membrane are Class A. Siding isn't quite as necessary, but if you're in one of those areas that risk factor has shaded in orange, you should at least consider it. Class A siding includes fiber cement, stucco, brick, stone, metal, and many others. If you don't want to replace your existing siding, like if you've got beautiful wood siding or something, you can also repaint it with a layer of intumescent paint, which expands when exposed to heat to form a non-flammable char layer, as shown to this picture. So fire-rated exterior walls are kind of the next step out. If you are unable to keep a solid defensible space around your home and live in a very, very fire-prone area, it's worth considering installing a fire-rated exterior wall. These are walls that have been tested as an entire assembly from the outside siding through the framing and insulation and into the inside drywall. These tests see how long the entire wall can hold up against a direct application of fire. So they start it at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and increase the temperature regularly until the assembly fails. Make sure that your wall assembly is fire rated from the outside. Many fire rated walls are only tested from the inside because they want to make sure that, like in condominiums or apartments, if someone starts a fire in one unit, it won't spread to the next one. But that's not where we're worried about the fire coming from in our case. So we want to make sure that the wall assembly is fire rated from the outside.
This is probably less of a DIY situation. But here we're pointing out that if you're in a high risk area, you want to take this risk very seriously, you want to put money into it. There
Hmm.
are like Superman level solutions available.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you're
Cool.
doing something like you need to replace the siding on your house anyways, it's going to increase your budget, but if you spend an extra $10,000 and make sure that the wall is going to be fire rated while you're replacing your siding, it gives you that extra level of protection.
For people who are really committed to an area, I could see this being powerfully reassuring.
Hmm. Yeah, knowing that your walls can stand up for an hour or 2 hours with that direct application of flame. I mean, that's that last 10%. The embers were 90%, and then, direct flame nearby is the last 10%. And so making sure that you're covered for almost every scenario is really, really comforting.
This is pretty wild too. It's cool.
Right. Yeah. So fire rated walls often use either 5/8 inches exterior gypsum board, exterior mineral wool board, or a very thick non-combustible siding material such as stone as part of that overall wall assembly. These materials will be outside of your framing, which will keep the structure of your home protected. As you can see, this wall assembly shown has a 2-hour fire rating from the outside, thanks to the 5/8 inch exterior gypsum sheathing, which is here, and then 3/4 inches exterior plaster. So those two layers, each one gives it an additional hour of fire rating. It's also worth noting that many natural building methods, such as cob, rammed earth, and hempcrete, are non-ignitable and are also fire rated when installed correctly. If you're building a new home, it's worth considering the benefits of natural building, both for yourself and for the planet.
And for it not lighting on fire. I've
Yeah,
heard you talking
definitely
about
for it not lighting
cob.
on fire. If it's not, if you're building with mud, it's really hard to catch that on fire. Yeah.
I think that's so cool. And on the Discord, I've really enjoyed looking at your continued experimentation with cob, with rammed earth, with hempcrete. I think it's so cool that these basic accessible materials could provide a really quality, resilient path forward in areas that are becoming increasingly fire prone.
Absolutely. It's usually a lot of manual labor to install them, so I would actually recommend them more for people who want to do a DIY kind of project, because, they're going to be very expensive if you hire other people to build a rammed earth wall for you. But the materials are available locally and they're fun to work with, and there's not usually a huge barrier to entry as far as skill goes. So they're really fun to experiment with. I would really recommend anybody try to make a rammed earth wall or a cob oven or something in their backyard. It's a lot of fun. All right, so now we're going to put it all together. I have some homework for everybody. So I want you to take a sheet of paper and pencil and walk around the perimeter of your house. I want you to draw a map. Start with a rough 5-foot perimeter and note your roof and siding materials, the location of all of your vents, where you have any decks or awnings, and where you have any plants right up next to your house. Also make sure to note your lawn furniture, ornaments, doormats, and any tools that you frequently leave out next to your house. Then walk out about 30 feet or as far as you can get if you have a smaller lot. Continue filling in your map. You don't need to know the variety of every plant, but do call out whether they're deciduous, coniferous, or something like a tall grass. If there are trees, write down if the canopies are touching. Make note of any areas that could be fuel ladders. Also write down what kind of mulch is on the ground. Draw all of your outbuildings, wood piles, and outdoor kitchens. If you're on a large lot, do the same thing 100 feet out. So here's an example that I drew from a home that I randomly selected online. I've got the 5-foot perimeter in red and the 30-foot perimeter in orange. I noted things in blue that I thought were good for defensible space and things in red that I thought could be problems. I've noted that this house has an attached wooden pergola and lots of coniferous trees and shrubs with very little space between them, including some that are quite close to the home up here. So the homeowners are going to have some hard decisions to make about how drastically they want to change their landscape. but I would suggest that at least removing the bushes nearest to that north side of their house is an obvious step to take. On this next page, I started to brainstorm ideas to the problems that I was seeing. Everything from repainting the house with intumescent paint to just setting reminders on their calendar to clean out gutters. And that's a big one that you can do yourself, is just set reminders to do that 5 foot defensible space to make sure that that's cleaned out every month or every couple months. Once you have some of these ideas down, begin to make a list. If it all seems super overwhelming right now, and it might, just start with the simplest items. Go sweep off your patio or clean out your gutters. So do a little bit at a time, and you'll start to chip away at it. For fire adaptation, an ounce of prevention is definitely worth a pound of cure.
I think it's very practical and very clear, this advice that you're giving.
Thank
I
you.
would encourage folks to really think about that vent mesh issue, because it's such a low cost, such an effective way to provide protection to your home.
Mhm.
And I really hope that many of you watching will join me and go out and do a perimeter walk around your place, because that's the first step. And just like Ash said, this doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't have to do it all at once. You're thinking about improving your odds. And we can substantially improve our odds. If our home ever encounters a brand blizzard where the odds of a home igniting are going to be really based on tinder, and that's the most likely situation that homes face, there's a
Definitely.
lot that we can do to build our resilience against fire. And Ash, thank you so much for leading us on this learning journey. I hope other people found it as practical, actionable, and approachable as I did.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, folks, thanks for watching. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the AR community, to the donors, to the volunteers, to everyone spreading the word online, and especially to everyone doing the work in your households and on the ground. It's thanks to all of you that I can keep doing this work, and I'm so grateful for your support. I'm glad to be getting ready with you, and I look forward to talking with you all again soon.